and welcome to healthyhouseplants.com, where we teach you all about gardening in the great indoors. If you'd like to support our show, please use our Amazon affiliate link below. Today I have a plant care video, which is also viewer inspired, from Sylvia Wyman, who asked for a video on how to grow asparagus fern. So this is the lovely asparagus fern. Botanical name is Asparagus Ethiopicus. So mouthful there. And you can just call it the asparagus fern for short. So this beauty is originally from South Africa. The asparagus ferns are, and there's various varieties. This one is very limey green. A lot of them are limey green. Some are a little greener, but for the most part, you're going to see this same kind of look here. And interestingly, though it is called a fern, it actually isn't even a fern. It's not from the fern family. It is, as mentioned, the Latin name is Asparagus Ethiopicus. So from South Africa. So this plant, as you can see, fluffy, delicate appearance, but it's really when you get in here, and it's a good reason to wear gloves when you're working with it, it can be a little on the spiny side. So the looks can be deceiving with this plant. It's a pretty easy to grow plant, but you can have some problems indoors when growing it. So I'm going to cover some of those, all of the things you need to know in order to have luck growing the plant. And that way you can have a good looking asparagus fern in your indoor garden. This one I do have hanging, so I've got it on a hanging basket hook here. They do make very nice hanging plants. They also make nice plants for spilling over the edge of things. And they also look good in the middle of a large table as well, with obviously without this on it. So like I said, delicate appearance, but pretty strong, pretty hardy plant. In terms of its foliage is actually on the tougher side when you go to work with it. The plant, okay, so how to keep this plant healthy and happy in your indoor garden. The first thing that you want to remember is the right light. This is really important. Incorrect lighting for this plant is going to result in some foliage problems. If the plant is getting too much light, for instance, you're going to have yellowing fronds. This one is a little yellowy here and there. Probably is getting a little bit too much light. Not too bad. A little bit of yellowing can also be because it needs to be fed, and I am now currently feeding my houseplants more than I was during the winter time, so that may rectify some of that too. But in terms of lighting, so what you want, they do best in bright, indirect light. So you don't want them up against a really bright window, like up against a southern window or a western window that gets a lot of light in the afternoon, because that could lead to yellowing foliage. In their native habitats, their natural environments, these ferns, quote in quotation marks, grow down on the ground, and they receive a lot of dappled light throughout the day. So keep that in mind when you're choosing the location in your home. Somewhere near a window, near bright light, but not with the bright light on the plant, directly on the plant. So that's the kind of lighting you want to look for. They also do well with full spectrum lighting if you don't have enough lighting for the plants. So you could put them near a full spectrum lighting system, light bulb, and that will help them grow really well too. And as mentioned, a lot of yellowing fronds. Start looking at your lighting and make sure that it's the correct lighting. If it's not the correct lighting, then rectify that. If you do, it could also be a sign of improper watering, and that's what the next thing that I'm going to talk about. So watering your asparagus fern. An asparagus fern is a pretty thirsty plant. So you may have to water it more than some of your other house plants. You want to water when the top 2 inches of soil has dried out. Also on the moisture meter, you want to water when it's just hit the 4, and so not as close to the 3, and then basically hit 4, 5, just was on 5 not too long ago and just hit the 4. You want to water thoroughly until the plant is really moist. Let the water drain out the drainage hole. It's going to be nice and heavy after you do that and full of water. You always want to make sure that you have a pot that has drainage holes in it because the fern sitting in water is going to get root rot very quickly. Brown fronds on the plant can be an indication of too little water. So if you start seeing some browning going on, then check your watering, use the moisture meter, make sure that you're watering correctly. So as mentioned, you're going to want to check on your fern a little bit more than your other plants. So maybe you check your other plants once a week. You're probably going to want to check your asparagus fern a couple times a week in terms of watering, especially in the summer months and spring months when they start to cycle and drink water a lot more frequently, a lot more of the water, I should say, instead of frequently. So in terms of watering, you could end up watering an asparagus fern once a week. And it will also depend, but don't use that as a rule of thumb, but your better thing is to check and see if it does need water. In the wintertime, it's not going to need as much water, cooler times of the year, fall, etc. So do check and make sure. It's also going to depend on where in the house you have the plant. If you have the plant in an area where it dries out more quickly, in a warmer room, etc. So those are all things to keep in mind when deciding if a plant needs water and how often you need to check it for watering readiness. Humidity. If you can provide your fern with a more humid environment than is in your home, it will do better. If you live in a really dry climate, you might consider getting a humidifier and using a humidifier for if you're really committed to keeping your asparagus fern really healthy. A humidifier can help you do that if you live especially if you live in a dry climate. If your home's really dry, and by that I mean if it's 40-45% humidity, the asparagus fern isn't going to really like that too much. If you get up to 50, 55, 60, it's a lot better. I do have a video on how to use a humidifier for your houseplants. I'll link that as well. And if you don't want to invest in a humidifier, or you really don't want to be messing around with a humidifier, misting your plant a few times a day helps. So if you have the plant in an area where you pass by, you can mist it with a fine mist of water. That will also help. Putting it on a humidity tray, if it's not hanging, putting it on a humidity tray will also help. And also growing your plant, as I always mention, the more plants you grow, the more humid your air will be. So the more plants you plant, the better it will be for the humidity of the other plants. Because what happens is plants transpire, and that when they transpire, they release moisture into the air, and that moisture humidifies the plant next to them. So basically they are humidifying each other. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Hanging. Now, if you are in a really dry climate, I would avoid hanging your asparagus fern, even though it's a beauty, even though it's really well suited for hanging. The problem with hanging is that heat, as you probably know, rises. It's much hotter air up there from a hanging position, and it's a drier air up there. And one of the reasons, not only because it's warmer up there that it's drier, but the other reason is the plant is suspended, and the bottom of the pot is getting air and the sides are getting air. So it doesn't have, when it's sitting on a table, it can more readily humidify itself even by transpiring and other plants around it. But usually you've got a hanging plant out in the middle basically of nowhere, right? And when it's hanging, you generally don't have other plants hanging right next to it. So it's just going to be a lot drier there. If you're not sure, use a hygrometer. I have a video on how to use it, those tools, put a link below for some of them to purchase as well, because They're pretty inexpensive little tools, and they tell you the humidity level in your home, which is so important when you're talking humidity, right? So we can stand in our homes and say, oh, it feels really dry here, my lips are dry, but we don't really know, for instance, is it 40% humidity? Is it 35? Is it 50? Is it 55? Are my lips just chapped because I was out in the wind? So that tool is really, really helpful for you to really get a good idea of humidity. Now, you say you want to hang the plant, so hold the hygrometer near the hanging plant for at least a couple minutes, and it will register the humidity for you in that area. Also keep in mind, time of year is going to affect humidity. If you live where it actually rains, I'm in Southern California, so we're always praying for rain, but if you live in an area where it rains a lot, then when it's raining, the humidity level is going to go up for you. So all those things to keep in mind in terms of humidity, but they don't necessarily need to be really, really high humidity, but they do like some humidity, because if it's not enough, the little leaves, they're like a needle-like leaf actually, will drop and things like that. So when they're not happy because of that. Okay. And then in terms of soil for this plant, a light, well-draining soil works well for asparagus fern. Adding some pumice into your soil if you feel like it's a little bit too heavy. I have a pumice product linked below, so that will allow for some drainage, but at the same time, you also want the soil to be moisture retentive. So I'll put some links for soils down below as well, because the soil is really important, and you want the soil to have some peat moss or some core in it, so that will hold the moisture and nutrients at the same time as the soil also drains. And fertilizing, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. So this is, I like this, the Epsoma. They have different types depending on your plants. This is just a general purpose indoor. I like to use this one on the asparagus fern. The asparagus fern, I do use my Green Gourmet houseplant food a lot, but it's a granular, so you need to work it in underneath into the soil, and it's possible to do, but these guys are a little on the prickly side, so doing that kind of work, and you obviously would want to wear gloves, is a little harder. So I will use liquids a lot of times on these plants as well. It's also, if you think that maybe the foliar yellowing could be due to a nutrient deficiency, and generally yellowing foliage is going to be a nitrogen deficiency on your plants. So there can be other things that can be going on to other micronutrient deficiencies, but the first thing you want to look at is nitrogen. So what happens when you do a foliar feeding? So you could do a foliar feeding with the liquid. It's a lot easier to do foliar feedings with the liquids, and I do have a video on doing foliar feeding. And when you spray the plant, so what you do is you spray the plant's leaves, the plants take up those nutrients much quicker than if you were to water the soil, because when you water the soil, it has to be converted and then taken up by the roots. When you spray the foliage will take in that the foliar food, whatever you're feeding it with. So another thing to keep in mind as well. So there you go with how to keep your asparagus fern healthy, happy, and really looking good in your indoor garden. Please let me know if you have any other questions about asparagus fern, if you've had anything, or you want to share your experience with growing them. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you for stopping by today. Please leave any comments about any indoor gardening tutorials you'd like to see. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And please check the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos are released.